The study of early Buddhism, that is, the Buddhism that might have been around at the time or around the time of the Buddha, that study has sort of gone out of fashion in recent decades in the academy. And there's lots of possible reasons for this. One possible reason is suggested in a recent paper by Bhikkhu Sujato. It's a paper that I've mentioned a couple of times in videos of mine. It's a paper comparing and contrasting early Buddhism on the one hand to Theravada Buddhism on the other, saying they're not the same thing. There are important differences we should keep in mind. And in today's video, what I want to do is to discuss one of these differences. A difference, again, that is, I think, relevant to this general question of the study of early Buddhism nowadays. Hello, by the way, and hope you're having a wonderful day. I am as well here and looking forward to discussing this little nugget of Buddhist wisdom with you on today's video. So in any event, what is this about? This is about what is known as the Doctrine of Two Truths. Now, what is that Doctrine of Two Truths? I've done videos about that in the past, which I will leave links to in the notes if you want to get a fuller picture. Very, very important doctrine in later Buddhism. Basically, it says that there is a distinction between what we might term the conventional truths of everyday life, the conventional kinds of truths that we hold when we discuss things with friends and family and neighbors and so on, and the ultimate truths, on the other hand, which are subtly but importantly different from conventional truths, or the truths of conventional life. Now that said, what is Bhikkhu Sujato's point here? What Sujato says is this: the Two Truths doctrine serves to deprecate the discourses which were taught by the Buddha in favor of the Abhidhamma, which was developed in later centuries. Now I'll get to the Abhidhamma and what that is in a moment, but for now the important point here is that this Two Truths doctrine somehow deprecates the teachings of the Buddha, deprecates the discourses. While there are indeed inklings of the Two Truths doctrine within the Buddha's own discourses, they're little more than inklings. They're just little hints here and there. In a broader sense, the Buddha did not ever give a doctrine of two truths. That's a later development. However, the Buddha did, let's say, on the one hand, discuss people, individuals, named things. He discussed himself, he discussed the self, he discussed training ourselves, at the same time that he also discussed the importance of non-self, of not I, not mine, not myself. And these two ways and methods of teaching can be seen as implicitly containing a doctrine of two truths within them. On the one hand, the doctrine of selves, on the other hand, the doctrine of not-self. The doctrine of not-self being the ultimate teaching, and the doctrine of selves, of individuals, people with names and so on, being the conventional teaching. And this is only one example out of many that we could give. Another example that I discussed in a recent video is the question about whether all of our karma, or I should say all of our experiences now are due to our karma. In the Abhidharma, it's held that all of our painful experiences are due to bad karma that we have lain down in the past. And so when in the discourses the Buddha claims that not all of our pains are due to our karma, Bhikkhu Bodhi, a translator and commentator, has said that this is only to be spoken from the position of conventional truths, essentially. That it's only conventionally true that our pains are not all due to karma. Ultimately, it is true that all of our pains are due to karma. That's another possible example we could give that I've recently discussed. Now, I don't want to get too much into the weeds with these examples. My point is simply to raise them as examples. The main point being that people could see, and doubtless would have argued, that although the Buddha never claimed that there were actually two truths, that nevertheless he was implying it by his method of teaching. And this would have come out in later days, later centuries after the Buddha's passing, when the monastics were left with an enormous amount of discursive material, discourse material from the Buddha. They would have been left with enormous amounts of memorized discussions between the Buddha and various people. And their project, as they would have seen it, was to compile all of this, to organize it, to systematize it into a form at which it could be more easily digested and understood by somebody who was coming in, let's say, for the first time. So they wouldn't have to memorize everything. They could simply look at the digest, look at the sort of simplified Cliff's Notes, if you like, of the Buddha's teaching. Now, that simplified Cliff Notes really was the Abhidharma, what we call the Abhidharma now, or Abhidhamma in Pali. This Abhidhamma was a sort of, again, a systematized, organized set of points, of positions, of views that one should hold, given the positions put forth in the discourses. Now, these monks who would have done this would have noticed these, as I've already described, potential contradictions in the discourses. The Buddha talking about individuals and people and selves on the one hand, and talking about non-self on the other. This is an apparent contradiction. Now, I certainly don't mean to say this is a literal contradiction. It's not. It simply, I think, demonstrates that the Buddha had a rather subtle notion of the self that can't be easily described in a single sentence, let's say. Nevertheless, the easiest way to have dealt with these kinds of apparent contradictions was to speak simply of there being two truths. A conventional truth in which we talk about people, individuals, chariots, houses, trees, and another ultimate truth in which we talk about, well, let's say the parts of these things, perhaps the elements involved in making them up, or the mental states involved in making up the mental parts of them, or the phenomenological appearances to us of them. There are lots of ways to interpret what we might term this ultimate truth, and indeed, we'll begin to understand that the precise character of that ultimate truth became a matter of argument, dispute, disagreement in later years. This indeed has become or has been in Buddhist studies, in Buddhism, an aspect of disagreement, dispute, really down to the present day. And meanwhile, much of the original teaching was left behind or deprecated in Sujato's words. That is to say, once we've established that something is ultimate truth, then why should we really care about conventional truth at all? It's not really truth. At least, given this comparison, it would seem that the ultimate truth is what we should be really focused on. Now, some later Buddhist thinkers, particularly wise Buddhist thinkers, have argued that in fact, within Buddhism, the conventional truths are just as important as the ultimate truths, and that we shouldn't lose sight of that fact. But I think that's really only some of the interpretation we get in Buddhist studies, in Buddhism, if we look at Buddhist thinkers. There's a lot on the other side as well that really emphasizes the ultimate as the true, what should be the true subject of our study. To take one example, one very famous example, perhaps the most famous example of a sutra from a philosophical sense in later Buddhism, we can look at or consider Nagarjuna's famous Mula Madhyamaka Karika, which is perhaps the most famous philosophical and most influential philosophical paper in later Buddhism. In that sutra, Nagarjuna makes, to my recollection, only a single mention of one of the Buddha's original discourses, and that mention is really in passing only a couple of lines. Now, I certainly don't mean to single out Nagarjuna. He certainly did and would have understood the early suttas as well as anybody, But nevertheless, just take this as an example where this extremely influential sutra really contains almost nothing cited of the original discursive material. And indeed, that citation was really in the service of demonstrating the point about ultimate truth that Nagarjuna was making. So once again, we're back to the same issue, that if we're really supposed to be, in our wisdom, understanding ultimate truth, the conventional tends to get left aside or deprecated. On the other hand, we might consider it part of the Buddha's genius that he avoided, on the whole, discussion of what constituted ultimate truth. Indeed, that it was part of his genius to avoid making this distinction to begin with. While focus on the ultimate, quote unquote, does indeed play a role in our attainment of enlightenment as we come with wisdom to understand things like non-self, nevertheless, the vast majority of our practice is in a more conventional space. So, for example, one of the ways that we come to an understanding of non-self is through an understanding of change of all things. And our understanding of change in all things comes through a direct understanding of people, of chariots, of trees, of houses, of these conventional objects. So it's through the conventional, necessarily through the conventional, that we come to an understanding, insofar as we do, of the ultimate. So the conventional really should be our focus, and I think that's part of the genius of the Buddha's approach in his discourses. Also, a focus on the ultimate often goes hand in hand with a kind of intellectualist interpretation of the Dharma, the kind that we see, let's say, in an academic setting, in academic discussions. This kind of arena of these hair-splitting specialists who are concerned with every, comma and period and where they all should go. That's the kind of thing that we find, for example, in the academy, or indeed in Buddhist academies in centuries past up to the present day. Now, that said, clarity and precision were, of course, lauded by the Buddha. The Buddha was very much in favor of our being clear and precise, but clarity and precision were to a particular end, that is to say, to the end of practice and eventually reaching enlightenment. To the extent that our clarity and precision are going hand in hand with arguments, disputes, and debates, it's not clear how useful they really are. Certainly for the Buddha, not everything was deserving of being completely clarified. That was indeed part of the heart and essence of the Buddha's own teaching, was that we really should not be trying to clarify everything, because that just takes us too far afield, but rather trying to focus on clarifying those things that are necessary and leaving the rest aside, which indeed involves a lot of these kind of hair-splitting disputes that I think the Buddha would have felt were less than essential for our real path. And to that end, I did a recent video on one of the Buddha's most famous similes, which is making this exact point. And I'll leave a link to that video up here on the screen if you haven't seen it. So if you're getting something out of these videos of mine, consider joining us, consider taking a look at my Patreon page, which is linked down below and in the notes, and seeing if you want to help out. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you on the next one, and meanwhile, all of you, be well.